There is a particular kind of silence that only exists in the middle of the night. It is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of a room that is waiting. And if you are hearing these words right now because something pulled you from sleep at an hour that felt strange, unexplainable, almost deliberate, I want you to know something before we go any further. You are not here by accident. Maybe you glanced at the clock and saw a number that startled you. Maybe your eyes simply opened. No dream to blame, no noise to explain it. Just a sudden and complete awareness that you were awake and the world around you was still. Maybe your heart was pounding for no reason you could name. Or maybe it was simply peaceful, a quiet nudge rather than a jolt, as though something gentle had reached into your rest and asked you to come back to the surface for a moment. Whatever the reason, whatever the hour, you are here now. And across the history of every soul who has ever lain awake in the dark, wondering if anyone out there understood what they were carrying, there has always been a whisper that says, the night is not empty. The night has never been empty. It has always been full of something moving quietly beneath the surface of things. Something patient enough to wait for the hours when the noise of the day finally falls away, and a person is left alone with their truest thoughts. Think about how rarely we are truly still. During the day, we are filled with obligations, conversations, screens, deadlines, worries about money, about family, about the future. We move so quickly that we rarely stop long enough to hear our own hearts, let alone anything beyond them. But the night strips all of that away. In the dark, there is no pretending. There is no performance. It is just you, your breathing, your thoughts, and whatever it is that has been sitting quietly at the edges of your life, waiting for a moment of stillness to finally be heard. Maybe that is why so many people throughout history have described their deepest turning points as happening not in the middle of a busy afternoon, but in the hush of night. Not because the night has some kind of magic in itself, but because the night is honest. It does not distract you. It does not let you run from what is real. And it is often in that honesty that something eternal finds the smallest opening to reach us. If you are feeling a weight on your chest right now, or a longing you cannot quite name, or even a strange sense of comfort you did not expect, please do not brush this moment aside as coincidence and roll over back into sleep without at least sitting with it for a while. Throughout the ages, people have spoken of moments like this as sacred interruptions, small appointments with something greater than the routine of daily life. Not because every unusual waking has some cosmic explanation, but because sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary night, a person's heart becomes tender enough to receive something it has been too busy or too guarded to receive during the day. Consider how much of your life has been spent bracing yourself, bracing for bad news, bracing for disappointment, bracing for another version of the same struggle you have already lived through more times than you can count. So much of our waking life is spent in defense, keeping our hearts protected because we have been hurt before, because we do not want to hope again only to be let down. But here, now, in this quiet hour, that armor is heavier to hold up. Your guard is down enough for something softer to reach you. And maybe that is exactly what is happening tonight. You might be someone who has been praying for a long time about something specific, a healing, a relationship, a decision, a breakthrough, and you have started to wonder if anyone is listening. You might be someone who has drifted so far from any sense of faith that you are almost embarrassed to admit you are even watching something like this. You might be someone who is not in crisis at all, simply awake, simply curious, simply willing to see where these words lead. Wherever you fall in that wide and varied company, you were not left out of this moment. This message is not reserved for the perfectly faithful or the deeply spiritual. It is for anyone whose eyes happen to open at this hour, and whose heart, even quietly, even reluctantly, wondered if there might be a reason. There is an old and comforting idea, carried through generations, that periods of stillness are not empty spaces to be filled as quickly as possible, but sacred pauses meant to be noticed. A pause before a decision, a pause before healing, a pause before something in a person's life begins to shift in a direction they could not have orchestrated on their own. If this is a pause for you, if this hour is a doorway rather than an accident, then the most important thing you can do right now is exactly what you are already doing: staying, listening, being present to this moment instead of rushing past it. You do not need the right words to respond to this. You do not need a perfect theology or a flawless understanding of what you believe. All that is being asked of you right now is your attention, and even that is more than enough. Sometimes the very first step towards something greater is simply refusing to go back to sleep on a moment that feels important, even if you cannot explain why. So take a breath. Let your shoulders drop from wherever they have been carrying tension, and let yourself consider, just for these next few minutes, that maybe, just maybe, you were meant to be awake right now. Not because anyone can promise you exactly what that means, but because throughout history, in every culture, in every century, people who paid attention to these quiet hours have often looked back and called them turning points. And you, awake in this very moment, might be standing at the beginning of one of your own. If you feel unsettled or unsure about why an ordinary night would feel so different tonight, you are in good company. Long before you, long before any of us, there were others who found themselves wide awake in hours they did not choose, unable to explain the stirring in their chest, and unsure of what to do with the strange sense that something was happening beneath the surface of an otherwise silent night. There is an old story of a boy named Samuel, sleeping in the quiet of a temple, who heard his name called in the middle of the night. He assumed it was the elderly priest he served, so he ran to him, only to be told that no one had called him at all. This happened not once, but multiple times, until finally the boy was gently guided to simply respond the next time he heard his name, to say that he was listening, that he was ready. It is a small story, almost simple in its telling, but it carries something profound. Sometimes the call comes more than once. Sometimes we mistake it for something ordinary before we understand what it actually is. And sometimes the only thing being asked of us is a willingness to answer, even without fully understanding what we are answering to. There is another story of a man utterly exhausted, hiding in fear, believing he was completely alone in his struggle, convinced that no one understood the weight he carried. He was told to wait, and what came next was not a storm, not an earthquake, not a fire, but a still, small whisper so quiet it almost went unnoticed. It was in the silence, not the spectacle, that he found what he needed. If you were expecting something loud and undeniable to happen tonight to prove that your waking meant something, perhaps the truth is closer to that whisper than to any grand event. Perhaps the meaning of this hour is not going to arrive with thunder. Perhaps it already arrived, quietly, the moment your eyes opened and your heart, without your permission, began to soften. There is the story of a man named Jacob, running from his past, sleeping outdoors, with nothing but a stone for a pillow, who woke from a vivid dream, declaring that he had encountered something sacred in that very place, and had not even realized it while it was happening. Surely, he said, this presence was here, and I did not know it. How many of us have walked through seasons of our lives completely unaware that we were not as alone as we believed ourselves to be? How many nights have passed where comfort was closer than we ever imagined, simply because we assumed silence meant absence? There is the story of a teacher named Nicodemus, a respected and educated man who came seeking answers not in the light of day, where his colleagues might see him and question his uncertainty, but under the cover of night, when it was safe enough for him to admit that he did not have everything figured out. His nighttime visit has been remembered for thousands of years, not because night is a magical time, but because night is often the only time we allow ourselves to be honest about our questions. Perhaps you can see the pattern forming here. Across so many of these stories, encounters with something greater did not happen in the middle of triumphant, confident, put-together moments. They happened in exhaustion, in fear, in running away, in quiet confusion, in the dark when there was no one else to perform for, no image to protect, nothing left to do but be exactly as tired, as uncertain, and as human as we actually are. If tonight you feel tired in a way that has nothing to do with lack of sleep, tired in your spirit, Tired of trying to hold everything together? Please hear this gently. That kind of tiredness is not a disqualification from being reached by something greater. It might actually be the very thing that made room for this moment to happen at all. It is often when we finally stop performing, stop pretending we are fine, stop pushing through on our own strength, that we become capable of noticing something we would have missed entirely during our busier, more guarded hours. There is comfort, too, in realizing you are not the first person to wonder if a sleepless hour meant something. Across centuries and cultures, this experience has repeated itself again and again. Human beings jolted awake with a strange and specific awareness that this particular night was not like the others. Some describe it as an inner knowing. Others describe a peace they cannot explain. Some describe unease that eventually softens into a strange comfort the longer they sit with it. There is no single formula for what this moment is supposed to feel like, because the point was never the feeling itself. The point has always been the response, whether a person, once stirred, chooses to lean in or roll back over. You have already chosen to lean in. You are still here, still listening, and that alone says something about the state of your heart tonight. Maybe you came looking for comfort. Maybe you came out of curiosity. Maybe some part of you, even one you have not fully acknowledged yet, came looking for a reason to hope again. Whatever brought you here, the same gentle pattern that echoes through every one of these old stories is quietly present now. A pause in the middle of an ordinary life. An invitation, soft rather than forceful, to notice something you might otherwise have slept right through. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. The way this hour seems to be inviting you to be honest with yourself. You did not wake up simply out of curiosity about ancient stories or spiritual patterns. Somewhere underneath the surface, there is something real going on in your life right now. Something heavy enough that your body and your spirit could not fully rest, even while you slept. Maybe it's worry. Worry about a diagnosis you're waiting on, or one you've already received and are still trying to make sense of. Worry about a relationship that feels like it is slipping through your fingers, no matter how tightly you try to hold on. Worry about a child who has drifted far from the person you raised them to be, and the ache of not knowing how to reach them anymore. Worry about money, about a job that feels unstable, about a future that looks nothing like the one you imagined for yourself even a few years ago. Maybe it's grief, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly during the day when there are tasks to distract you, but that shows up at 3 a.m. with nothing to compete with it, reminding you all over again of someone you loved and lost, or a version of your own life you thought you would have by now. Grief is patient. It waits until the room is quiet, and then it speaks. Maybe it's guilt, a memory of something you said or did, or failed to say and failed to do, that has followed you for longer than you'd like to admit. A sense that you are somehow disqualified from peace because of choices you made in a season of your life you wish you could take back. If that is what kept your eyes open tonight, I want you to hear this clearly. Guilt convinces us that we are the only ones unworthy of grace, and it is almost always lying. Every single story we walked through in the last chapter involved flawed, frightened, imperfect people. Not one of them was chosen because they had it all together. They were chosen in the middle of their mess, not after they cleaned it up. Maybe what you're carrying is simply exhaustion with no clear cause. The kind of tiredness that has nothing to do with how many hours you slept, and everything to do with how long you have been holding yourself together without anyone noticing how much effort that takes. You smile through the day. You show up for the people who need you. You keep moving because stopping feels dangerous. Like if you slow down even for a moment, everything you have been holding up might finally fall. And then the night comes, and in the stillness, all of that weight you've been carrying quietly demands to be acknowledged. If any of this feels familiar, if some part of what I just described landed somewhere tender in your chest, please do not push it away. This hour did not find you to make you feel worse about what you are carrying. It found you because you have been carrying it alone for far too long, and something greater than your circumstances wanted you to know that you do not have to carry it that way anymore. There is a kind of comfort that says everything is fine, that nothing hurts, that pretends the ache away. That is not the kind of comfort being offered to you tonight. What is being offered is something steadier, not the absence of your struggle, but a presence within it. Not a promise that the difficulty disappears the moment the sun comes up, but an assurance that you were never meant to face it by yourself in the first place. There is an old and often repeated invitation that speaks directly to weariness, calling out to those who are tired and heavily burdened, offering rest not as an escape from life, but as a companionship through it. Rest, in this sense, is not sleep. It is the quiet exhale that comes when a person finally stops pretending they can hold everything up on their own strength. If you have been trying to hold everything up on your own strength for longer than you can remember, this hour might be exactly the moment to finally set some of it down. You do not need to have the right words for this. You do not need a polished prayer or a perfect explanation of your faith. If all you can manage tonight is something as simple and honest as "I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm tired, and I don't want to carry this by myself anymore," that is more than enough. Sincerity has always mattered more than eloquence. The most meaningful prayers throughout history were rarely poetic. They were desperate, honest, unfiltered admissions from people who had run out of other options and finally turned towards something greater than themselves. So if you are lying there right now with tears you have been holding back, let them come. If your chest feels tight with everything you have not said out loud to anyone, let this be the place you finally say it, even if it's only in the quiet of your own mind. You are not weak for feeling this deeply. You are human, and being human in a broken world was never meant to be carried without support. Tonight, in this strange and quiet hour, that support is closer than you think, waiting patiently the way it always has, for you to finally stop running and simply be still long enough to receive it. Now that we have sat together in the honesty of this hour, the question becomes what to do next. Not tomorrow, not next week when life gets busy again and this quiet moment fades into memory. Right now, while you are still here, still awake, still tender enough to let something real take root. The first thing I want to offer you is permission. Permission to stop treating this moment as strange or embarrassing. There is nothing unusual about a tired soul waking in the night looking for meaning. It has happened to people across every generation, every background, every walk of life. You are not fragile for feeling moved by this. You are not foolish for wondering if it matters. Some of the most important shifts in a person's life have begun with nothing more dramatic than an unexplained pause in an otherwise ordinary night. The second thing I want to offer you is an invitation to respond rather than simply reflect. It is one thing to feel something in this moment and let it pass by mourning, like a dream you can barely remember. It is another thing entirely to let it become the beginning of something. That does not require a dramatic life change tonight. It does not require you to have everything figured out before the sun rises. It simply requires a small, honest turning of your heart toward whatever it is you have been avoiding, whether that is grief you have not processed, forgiveness you have not offered or received, a relationship you have neglected, or a faith you have quietly walked away from without ever fully deciding to. If there is a person you have been meaning to call, to forgive, to apologize to, or simply to check on, let this be the moment you decide, even quietly, that you will finally do it. Not because a video told you to, but because something in you already knew it needed to happen. And this hour simply gave you the stillness to admit it. If there is a burden you have been white-knuckling through on your own, a health concern, a financial fear, a family struggle, a private sorrow no one else knows about, let this be the moment you finally loosen your grip. Not because the problem magically disappears, but because you were never meant to hold it alone in the first place. There is a peace available, even in the middle of unresolved difficulty, a peace that does not depend on your circumstances changing, but on you no longer facing them in isolation. If there is distance between you and any sense of faith, whether that distance came from hurt, disappointment, doubt, or simply drifting slowly over the years without ever noticing how far you'd gone. Let this be the moment you consider taking one small step back. Not a leap, not a complete transformation overnight. Just one small, honest step, a whispered prayer, an open heart, a willingness to wonder again instead of assuming you already know the whole story. You do not have to understand everything to take that step. Faith has never required perfect understanding. It has only ever required willingness. A willingness to trust that the same quiet presence that has shown up throughout history, in the middle of ordinary, exhausted, uncertain lives, might be showing up in yours tonight too, not with certainty you can prove, but with a gentle invitation you are free to accept or set aside. If you choose to accept it, even hesitantly, even with more questions than answers, know that you are joining a long and quiet company of people who once lay awake in their own dark hours and decided not to go back to sleep on what they were feeling. People who whispered honest, imperfect words into the silence and found, whether immediately or slowly over time, that they were not as alone as they believed. People whose lives shifted not because of one dramatic moment, but because they finally stopped ignoring the quiet nudges that had been trying to reach them all along. As you move forward from this hour, whether you fall back asleep in a few minutes or lie awake a while longer, carry this with you. You were not overlooked tonight. Whatever pulled you from your rest, whatever question or ache or quiet hope brought you to these words, it mattered enough for you to still be here, listening all the way to the end. That is not nothing. That is not coincidence stacked upon coincidence. That is a heart still soft enough to be reached, still willing enough to wonder, still open enough to hope. So before you close your eyes again, take one more breath. Let it be slower than the ones before it. Let your hands unclench from whatever they've been holding onto so tightly, and let yourself simply say, in whatever words come naturally to you, that you are here, that you are listening, and that you are willing to see where this leads. You do not need to know what tomorrow holds to trust that tonight was not wasted. Sometimes the most important thing we ever do is simply refuse to sleep through the moment that was quietly, patiently, waiting for us to finally wake up.